Inflation is rising again. Debt service cost is spiking. Fuel shortages are everywhere in Russia, even in the country's capital, Moscow. While revenues, tax intakes keep shrinking. But forget about all that. Old news. We know something big has just happened that has showed us that Russian economy is in deep, deep trouble. Even officials now admit this is it. The countdown to Russia's economic Armageddon has begun. The clock is ticking. Stick around if you want numbers, figures, and events, because I have plenty of those coming up. Howdy, howdy, everyone. My name is Konstantin. Welcome to Inside Russia, where usual Russia is explained by the unusual Russian. This is October 1st, Wednesday, and this is another weekly economic update. Week 40 in review. The goal of this ongoing series is to document Russia's economic transformation in real time. Weekly, consistent coverage gives a truer picture than isolated headlines. Every Wednesday, I track the same core dashboards: rates, budget, fuel, revenues, prices, industries, trade. So you can see what actually changed. But every week, I give something new to you. And today's news is big. Stick around. So, why it matters, where the trend is pointing to, that's what you find here at Inside Russia every Wednesday. All my reports are built on verifiable public reporting, market data, and open sources. No hype, just facts and context. Now to the analysis. If you follow my Wednesday weekly reports, you know that I always break down my reports into three parts. I break down how the economy is broken down, and it can be analyzed at three main levels, each with its own focus and scope. There are the individual level, also called microeconomics agents. It studies individuals, households, and businesses. Then there is microeconomy, studies specific sectors or markets, and macroeconomy. It studies entire national economy. And this is how I structure my weekly economic updates here at Inside Russia. And I start with microeconomic agents again because it's about what impact changes in the economy have on lives of regular folks in individual companies. This week, I want to share two personal stories with you. Well, two personal experiences, so to speak. I would like to share stories of two persons I know. Two women, both with higher education, professional jobs, and solid careers. One lives in a large city in southern Russia, and another one lives in another large city in northwest of Russia. Both were fairly well-to-do in the past. Well, let's call the first woman Mrs. A, 53-year-old, married with grown-up children. Children don't live with her and husband. She is in insurance business. For the past 16 years, she's worked for a large insurance company. She's in charge of a small department in the regional office of a large corporation, a national insurance company that everyone in Russia has heard of. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you the name for privacy reasons. Mrs. A is not a big boss in the company, but not an entry-level employee either. She's somewhere in the middle. Mrs. A was always considered middle class. She earned enough to have a decent life, to own a small car, to vacation in Turkey or Egypt once a year, sometimes once in 2 years when the times were hard. Well, Until the start of the war, Mrs. A was debt-free. She inherited an apartment from her parents, not a big one, but enough for a family to live, just a regular Russian size apartment. She even managed to have some money saved. It was before the war. Fast forward to now, late September 2025. Mrs. A knocked on the door of a person I know personally asking for help. Mrs. A offered to sell the person the set of rattan furniture that she owns. Well, I guess she owned. She knew that the person liked her furniture. But he never asked Mrs. A to buy it from her. He had no intentions to buy. He just happened to like that set of furniture. And there, Mrs. A was standing on the doorsteps and begging to sell the furniture. Did anything bad happen to her all of a sudden? Like a serious sickness? Perhaps an accident? These things happen, and some of us are in need of instant, sum of money to take care of things. And usually people go to bank. In Russia, they go to neighbors or most likely to family members, friends. These things happen. Well, it turns out nothing happened with Mrs. A. She has a credit card bill she can't afford to pay. She still has the job that pays her the same. She inquired her boss for an increase, a salary increase, but was turned down. No time to ask for raise. Times are tough, and everyone at the office should be thankful to keep their current jobs. That was the answer for her asking for a raise. How did Mrs. A accumulated debt, and how big is it? Well, little things, little by little. A visit to a dentist when all of a sudden she had a toothache, paying utility bill, some extra expenses one month, getting a birthday present for one of her daughters another month. And things, these little things have added to about $2,000 or 170,000 rubles. It's really about 2 monthly salaries of Mrs. A, but she can't pay. The salary is the same, but the prices have recently skyrocketed. Well, they have been skyrocketing for the past 2.5 years. In good times, in normal times, she'd be making the payments on this credit card bill, no problem. But now she can't pay off she can't make even monthly payments. The family simply won't have enough food. And she's already late 30 days. She's afraid that the bank will come knocking on her door, collecting things if she misses another payment. So she starts selling off her belongings. That nice rattan furniture set, went first. What's next? And by the way, the banks these days are much stricter. Before, they usually cut slack to customers if they were late. Now they prefer collecting early, not to let debts pile up, because there's too much of different debts have piled up already. Life of Mrs. A drastically changed, and it's not getting any better. And Mrs. A is looking to the future with fear. She doesn't know what to do. She's afraid to change job, and there are not too many opportunities in the marketplace right now. Imagine Mrs. A losing her job, and sooner or later, she will lose her job. Now, let's call the second woman, the second story, from the second story, Mrs. B, 36-year-old, single, living by herself in a big city, a city dweller really, renting, no own apartment, very smart lady with higher education, work experience, good work ethics. She works at a medium-sized recruiting company. She's a manager, like upper level manager. Her rent is about 60,000 rubles, or around $800 per month. How much she earns per month, I don't know. She didn't share. That's personal information. Well, she complained to me that she started pinching pennies, literally. It's a very similar story, to Mrs. A. Good life before, I guess she's Miss B, not Mrs. B. Okay, she's single, right? Miss B. Okay, so very similar story to Mrs. A. Good life before, traveling often, going to Turkey, Egypt, sometimes to the Maldives, going out eating a lot, movies, theater often, new clothing almost every month. Now she has enough money just to pay her rent and buy basic food. No going out anymore. She can't afford anything else, literally. Her company has just laid off a few employees. So she considers herself lucky to have kept the job. A raise is out of the question. So Ms. B considers moving away from the city to faraway suburbs to pay cheaper rent, and she would have to travel 3 hours daily round trip to work. And she's willing to do that. She has switched to cheaper food. Now she buys in bulk. She said never happened before. She's even a bit ashamed of doing that. Now, Ms. B buys bare minimum clothing these days. She finds that deepest deals, highest deals on the marketplaces. That's the cheapest place you can go and buy clothing right now. She used to have a good life before the start of the war. Not any longer. And by the way, both Mrs. A and Ms. B, they live in big cities where life is better, where there are more career opportunities, much higher wages and salaries than in small towns. People, when they want to upgrade their living standard in Russia, they move to bigger cities. And if they want to really upgrade, then they move to Moscow, to the capital. Now, why am I telling you these two stories about just two women? I mean, just two people. Because I keep hearing more and more stories like that. It's not just the story of Mrs. A and Miss B. I've heard almost a dozen stories in the last couple of months. This is becoming a system in Russia. That's what everyone is going through. And it's not just about people. It's about businessmen, business owners, business people. Fresh from the oven. A story of a fella from Tashkent Breakfast Club who recently traveled to Russia and came back. All businessmen are complaining. They don't know how to survive any longer. At least from his circle. He said that's the first time he saw anything like that. Before, everyone was doing okay, full of optimism, saying, hey, no big deal, we survived worse times now. We'll get through it. Now, they're not saying that any longer. What we're seeing in Russia right now, the tsunami, the economic tsunami, is finally flooded everyone, and everyone is underneath the water right now, under the water. And Russian people have started picking up the bill for Putin waging the war in Ukraine. I've been saying it for 3.5 years. I've been saying it like a maniac, that's going to happen. Well, that's happening right now. Now, let's move to microeconomics, to the markets. Microeconomic analysis. And I'd like to start with aviation industry. Well, that's a good one. As you know, Russia has an aviation industry. It has quite a few airlines, and Russians actually can fly, except for those who live in the cities where are near the war, and like Rostov-on-Don, Krasnodar, Kursk, Voronezh. Those airports have been permanently closed since the start of the war. Everyone else in Russia can actually fly. Yes, it's much more expensive now. Everything is much more expensive, but the planes are flying. How come? Are they Russian made? No. Russian airlines simply stole the planes. Every single foreign made plane right now, well, shouldn't say foreign made, every single plane made by Airbus and Boeing are stolen. Theft was committed, but we all know that. Now, Russian passenger jets have always lagged behind the Western ones. Military tech is different, but we're talking about passenger jets. They always had worse characteristics than Boeing, McConnell Douglas way in the past, and Airbus recently. Okay, and after the start of the war, obviously the Russian aviation industry has been sanctioned and cut off from the rest of the world. You can say isolated, right? Now, Putin started pumping money into the development of Russian-made plane, AMC-21, a brand new plane. At first, Russia was developing it with China. I believe the Chinese were taking care of the engines and Russia of the frame of the plane, but the Chinese simply departed the project. They're making their own plane. And Putin has been pumping aviation industry, well, Russian military-industrial complex, really, because that's Sergei Chemezov. He's one of his best friends, promised him to make this new plane. And Sergei Chemezov is the owner of Russia's military-industrial complex, 80% of it, okay, including the plane manufacturing company and plants. So anyway, 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025, they have been lots of billions of, tens of billions of rubles, dozens of billions of rubles subsidies. Basically, the state was giving out taxpayers' money to this Russian company or group of companies headed by Sergei Chemezov to build plane. Hey, have some 60 billion rubles this year. I have some 70 billion. Have some, well, you know what? 2025, money's over. That time is over. Money's out. Russian budget is not in a good shape at all, and I'm going to speak of it at the end. And Russian state is cutting everything. Costs, it's cutting costs in every single area of life. And it's cutting subsidies to the aviation industry for the first time in years. Now, the only plane, right now Russia doesn't produce any planes, okay? The only plane it successfully, semi-successfully produced was SSJ-100 Superjet, and was manufactured in Russia, but the only Russian product used in the production was aluminum for a plane's frame. Everything else came from abroad. Now, at this point, in 2026, Russian government announced it's cutting subsidies to the aviation industry for the development and new plane and new technologies by 1/3, 33%. It'll be 43 billion rubles against 65 billion in 2025. In 2027, 2028, there are more cuts planned. Well, this is it. Goodbye Russian planes. And kind of goodbye Western planes, because they can't fly forever without maintenance, without spare parts. Right now, Russian government is fighting to get sanctions lifted. Belarusian company Belavia had its sanctions lifted last week. I don't know why. Obviously, it's going to be trying to supply parts from Boeing and Airbus into Russia, Russian airlines. So they're desperate. But I think this is it. No matter what happens next, Russian aviation industry is in big, big trouble. We will see Russian planes fall from the sky. Now, the next industry is oil and gas. Big news came from Turkey last week. It has decreased oil imports from Russia to the minimum since April. Now, they were hits on Black Sea oil terminals by Ukrainian air forces, Ukrainian drones, really. Novosibirsk port and Tuapse port were hit. Both had oil terminals. And both ports are out of operations right now. When they'll be put back into the operations, when the damage will be fixed, we don't know at this point, not known. Now, first Ukrainians started hitting the Baltic Sea terminals a couple weeks ago, and now they have expanded into the Black Sea. And we're seeing the effect right now, immediately, instantly. Turkey has decreased importing of Russian oil. Now, the only significant countries that import Russian oil these days are India, China, and Turkey. India number 1, China number 2, and Turkey. Turkey, minus 22% lately. Lowest since April. Not a good trend for Russian state. That depends on exports of oil so much, exports of crude oil. Now, China, oh boy. Now, India is a different story. India has decreased buying Russian oil, but India is under tremendous pressure from Donald Trump in the United States. It's being threatened. The tariffs have been slapped on India, all Indian goods imported to the USA for buying Russia's oil. So India is a separate story. But China has never been touched by anyone, by the USA. No one has even proposed to think about slapping tariffs as a punishment for buying Russian oil on China. Okay, so China makes absolutely independent decisions: what to buy, how much to buy, and who to buy it from. So guess what? China has also started cutting importing Russian oil. Not much, by about 11% in the first half of 2025 compared to the first half of 2024. But that's a start. That's a very good start. That's a very troubling trend for them in Russia. And I guess, not so much troubling for us. It's a very sovereign decision. Putin loves this word. It says, sovereignty of Russia is so important. We must stay the sovereign country. We must remain the independent sovereign country. Well, China is a very sovereign country, and it's making the decision to cut importing Russian oil. And there's another trend emerging, which is also very, very interesting. And this is the first time I heard about it, and just happened. I say that Russia's bread makers are oil and gas, but also Russia exports lots of metals, ferrous, non-ferrous metals. Ferrous, steel, all kinds of steel products. Non-ferrous, aluminum and nickel, among the top ones. And aluminum, copper, and nickel. So three. Aluminum, copper, and nickel. And guess what? Copper and nickel. China starts exporting less of copper and nickel. And China has historically been the largest importer. It starts importing less Russian copper and nickel. Wow! Just wow! I keep my popcorn right here because that's not good. That's not good for Russia. I'll tell you a little bit more about aluminum just in a few minutes. Agriculture, so hugely important for Russia. We all need to eat, right? How much and how well we eat depends on what Russian agricultural companies grow. The emergency mode due to crop failure in Rostov province has become federal. Yes, things are very, very bad. Wheat crops, the harvest is halved compared to 2023. Back then, 16 million ton of wheat were harvested. 2025, only 8 million ton. Okay. A lot of farmers, due to decreasing margins in harvesting wheat, they switched to sunflower because sunflower is another bread making product, soft commodity that is grown in Russia. Sunflower. It's used for different products and it's used for oil, pressing oil. So Italians drink olive oil, Russians drink not drink use olive oil. Russians use sunflower oil, sunflower seeds oil. So most of sunflowers are gone because extremely bad weather this year for them. So those who switched away from wheat, they didn't benefit at all. So, and the wheat farmers have incurred tremendous losses. Rostov governor spoke to Putin about that. He asked for subsidies or aids, really, for aid for Rostov farmers. Well, he was denied. If we're talking about all crops, not just wheat, 1/7 of the crops in the province have been destroyed. More than 10,000 hectares. The yield has dropped tremendously, not just wheat, but everything. And last year, they harvested 35 centers of grain per hectare. This year, it's only 27, or even less. Now, the governor reported that the situation was discussed at the highest level with the president and the minister of agriculture. It's just he didn't report that nothing is going to be done about that. And Russian farmers, Rostov farmers, are pretty much on their own. Wow, this is not good. This is not good. The cheapest potato, by the way, right now, is you can find it. And it's going to be the cheapest in the entire year because this is the harvest time. Potato is fresh from the ground, out of the ground. And the cheapest one you can buy, if you go to a village near Rostov-on-Don, which has topsoil everywhere and people grow lots of potatoes, it's big business. So if you go in a village, you can buy the cheapest potatoes of individual people who grow their own potatoes, right? 80 rubles. If you go to a store, over 100 rubles. The highest season right now, supposed to be cheapest potatoes. That's when my family in the USSR would buy 2 large 100-pound sacks of potatoes to keep us fed through the winter, okay? Because it was the cheapest this time of year. Not so cheap anymore. I am waiting for the potato crisis to deepen. It's already full-blown, okay? Now, retail, oh boy. Where do I even start on the retail? I have said many times this company's name in my Wednesday weekly economic reviews. The company's name is M-Video. That's equivalent, well, that's analog, I should say, of Best Buy in the United States. Many of you know Best Buy. Same concept. I think it was copied from Best Buy. So M-Video was very successful retailer, Russia's largest electronics retailer, for a long time until the war started. And for the past couple years, the sales have been dropping. And last week, I reported a dire situation. No profits, losses, debt astronomical. Something happened today. All of a sudden, the stock of M-Video, which is being traded at the Moscow Stock Exchange, still being traded, jumped up by 25%. Now, if stock goes up by a quarter, then it must be some kind of awesome event happening. Therefore, it drives the optimism of investors up, and they start buying the stock. And that's exactly what happened. Chinese online retailer JD.com announced the plans to participate in the additional issue of M-Video stock. The Russian company is negotiating with strategic investors to stage an additional issue of their stock to sell it and to cover up some losses and to pay off debts. And some negotiations are basically this negotiation is in the final stage. The future share of the Chinese retailer JD.com in M-Video is unknown at this point, but industry insiders are suggesting that the Chinese can receive a blocking package of shares, 25% plus one share. Well, that's a takeover of the company. Imagine a competitor comes in, although foreign, but still competitor, comes in and takes and buys 25% plus one share of the company. Now, it will be having seats at the board of directors. It will be controlling the company a great deal. At the moment, it's difficult to assess the likelihood of the deal. They're still negotiating, but I take liberty to say that the Chinese will enter Russian market. So the stocks are up by 25%. The Chinese company is interested in strategic partnership, which implies the development of cross-border trade and promotion of its own goods and assortment of products in Russian stores. Now, the experience JD.com has in the field of e-commerce and implementation of AI and logistics, it can significantly strengthen the Chinese company position on Russian market. Well, actually, that's a entry point to the Russian market and can keep M-Video afloat. At this point, I don't quite understand why the Chinese need this deal, why the Chinese want to enter Russian consumer electronics market that is falling. And it is very obvious to everyone, it's obvious to me, that Russian market has very dark future for years, perhaps decades to come. Now, the only explanation is the Chinese, and this is the first step. I think other Chinese companies are going to follow, and that's something to watch for. The Chinese are going to be using this weak positions of large Russian companies to easily take them over, to softly expand into Russia. And there's nothing Russians can do about that. It's incredible. It's definitely a new trend and something to watch about. Now, the next industry is oil refining. Oh boy. Now, the latest news from Crimea as of yesterday, Crimea introduced a complete and utter rationing for gasoline to be sold. No more than 30 liters per car, per person. There are quite a few gas stations in Crimea that have closed down. And there are most of gas stations, they actually don't have gasoline. They don't have premium, 95 octane number, and some having difficulties with stocking 92, regular 92 octane number. Now, it's very disturbing news because for Russia, because these shortages of gasoline, they're spreading like wildfire throughout Russia. I saw the first signs. 4 provinces, Rostov, Crimea, and 2 provinces in the Far East, showed the first signs of shortages. The first reports came in. That was mid-August. Now, 6 weeks later, all over Russia. And the most disturbing news for Russia and good news for Ukraine is that the situation has gotten so bad that right now, some gas stations that belong to Russia's second largest oil company, Lukoil, have no gas at some stations. Not all, but at some gas stations. It is disturbing because Lukoil is a vertically integrated oil company. It's number 2 in Russia. It has oil extraction, oil fields, tremendous oil fields, oil extraction, oil transportation, oil refining. Lukoil owns state-of-the-art refining facilities, refineries. It has refined products exports. It sells a lot of diesel and gasoline to other countries, to customers in other countries. And it has a large network of gas stations inside Russia. So basically, they don't buy gasoline from anyone. They produce it. And Lukoil has started having problems in Moscow, among all other places. You know, Moscow never has troubles with anything. Even in the late 80s, when in the USSR, we had shortages of everything. For the first time I visited Moscow in 1988, I was shocked. I saw actually food and goods at stores. In other cities, in the entire USSR, we didn't have that. In Moscow, they did. They tried to protect Moscow from all kinds of shocks, including the fuel shock. Well, you know what? They can't. They can't. Moscow is experiencing troubles with that. So now, the gas station, remember, Russia is the big gas station, only it doesn't have gas anymore. The big gas station without gas. It's pretty funny. I'm wondering, what will come next? Well, obviously the more shortages, but the big question is, what will they do next? What can they do? The oil refineries are getting hit almost every single day. The latest hit was today, Yaroslavl oil refinery. Not a big one, but still a facility that refines oil. Okay? What will they do next when they completely run out of gas? Will they be buying gas from other countries? Paying with what? Whoa, this is big. Civil manufacturing is the next industry. Troubles. By the way, all industries I'm going to tell you are troubles. Just one industry, except for one. And it's not like I specifically choose the troubled industries. They all are in trouble. There's one industry that consistently shows growth and profits, very high profits. Later on that. Civil manufacturing decreased by 6.3% in the last 12 months. This data comes from Rosstat. I think it's cooked. But even cooked 6.3% decline, it's bad. Imagine what the real data is. And if we compare August 2025 to August 2024, we'll see in 1 month 4.5 decline in civil manufacturing. 4.5% in 1 month. In plain English, folks, it's not good. And this particular data comes from CMAC, the Center for Macroeconomic Analysis. It's headed by the brother of Russia's Minister of Defense, Belousov. So I guess the guy has connections. The guy who heads CMAC has connections, and he's not that afraid of giving not pleasant numbers. It's one of the very few sources inside Russian government that actually gives not pleasant numbers. True numbers, I guess. Now, SMOC reports that all civil manufacturing sectors are declining. Not just a few, not just selected ones, all. All. It also reports that the level of civil manufacturing in Russia is nearing the 5-year minimum. Now, I'm seeing that there are 4,500 people watching me right now live. Now, folks, I think this is one of the biggest points I'm making in this live stream right now about Russian economy. Think of your country. I know a lot of people from America, from Canada, from Brazil, Mexico, European countries, Australia, of course, New Zealand. Think of your country. Imagine that situation in your country in manufacturing goes back 5 years. What happened 5 years ago? 2025 minus 5, 2020. COVID pandemic. CV-19. Well, guess what? 5 years ago was the height of COVID pandemic in Russia. Everything was under strict lockdown. At this channel inside Russia, it was a tiny, small channel. I was reporting so much about developments of COVID situation in Russia. Go and watch my streams and videos about COVID, right? Russia was under strict lockdown. You couldn't even get outside to walk on the street. And imagine how little manufacturing was done back then. The workers simply were not allowed to get to the workplaces. And now Russia is back there again. It's just incredible. It's incredible. I don't know what to say. This is sick. Zero. Civil industries are nearing zero manufacturing. Well, it goes without saying, the Russian military-industrial complex is still producing a lot of death. That death doesn't add value to Russian economy. Death just flies out of, trucks and cannons and, air dropped from the planes, and it blows up on in Ukraine, on top of people, and it doesn't do any good to Russian economy. And that's what they manufacture in mass right now. Civil manufacturing has stopped. Well, they'll hit the bottom, and then they'll break the bottom, and they'll be descending below the bottom. Now, I'd like to speak about bankruptcies. Another more information coming from SMOC, the Center for Macroeconomic Analysis, a part of Russian government. And this situation is pretty, how do I say, scary? Now, I'm not talking about people, I'm talking about companies. According to SMOC, now, at this point, it projects that a quarter of all Russian companies, will be near bankruptcies by the end of the year 2025. In the year of 2026, nearly a third of companies will be near bankruptcies. Now, in the beginning of the live stream, I told you the story about two women, Mrs. A, Ms. B. They're having troubles. They are nearing, defaulting their loans, credit card loans, companies are in big, big trouble as well. I see a big collapse of Russian banks, because Russian banks are they're gonna bite the bullets of bankruptcies. And now, I would like to bring up one interesting fact. Rosstat, Russia's statistics agency. We all know they're a bunch of liars, no good bums, right? But they're caught lying again this time. They just announced that in August, oil refining dropped by 0.9%, less than 1%. Now, I just told you what's going on with oil refining. Shortages of gas and diesel fuel. The gas that is sold at gas stations is sold at astronomical price, 70 plus rubles per liter, okay? Imagine so many attacks. Every single night, they announced that there was an attack on some kind of facility, either compressor station or pipeline or refining facility or storage facility. So many refineries offline, almost 30% of all refineries in the central Russia, in the western Russia are offline. Shortages, my God, shortages all over Russia. Can you believe that less than 1% of decrease in refining output could cause this havoc in Russia's gas market? Now, bunch of liars, I'm telling you, and they're getting caught red-handed and they don't care. Oh, I can't stand them. And they're getting paid by taxpayers' money. And taxpayers, it's none of our business, you know. Oh, we don't want to know about that because we're gonna, it gets stressful to know about that. Darn right, that's stressful. Darn right. Now let's move to invest. I gotta take a sip of. I'm drinking water today, not tea. I'm sorry. Emotional. This is very emotional for me. My country is falling apart right in front of my eyes. And I don't know what to tell you. I forecasted this demise. I know it was coming. It has come. I'm seeing it happening. I don't forecast any longer. I just tell you what happens. Someone asked me, Konstantin, why do you do the same thing every Wednesday? Why do you tell us of the same things? Well, the thing is, things change so much every single week. And I am documenting the demise of Russia. And the demise comes first into the economy. And it brings down everything else. This is why I'm doing these reports. And they're not easy for me because I don't like Russia to be over. But at the same time, I like them because I don't like this Russia that has become, that spat me, that chewed me up and spat me out, that invaded Ukraine, has been killing Ukrainians. I don't like this Russia, okay? I want it to fall into ashes and then later be reborn like Phoenix, okay? So, very emotional, sorry. Investments. What do you think happens to investments when a country attacks neighbor, is ostracized by the entire world, by international community, and isolated from the rest of the world in every single possible way? What do you think happens to investments? I think we're thinking the same. Investments vanish, disappear. Now, Russia invaded 3 years ago, and there was a lot of positive talk among Russian politicians on now all the companies are gone, Western investors are gone, now we take control of our own future, we take control of our country, all the Westerners are out, them Satanists, they're no good bums, they just wanted to destroy a country, they were just pumping money and building the factories and feeding us bad food, and anyway, now, Western investors long gone. They left immediately after the start of the war. And guess what? Russian private investors also gone. Because if you're an investor, if you have lots of money, why would you invest in Russia, right? the Russian state sooner or later will confiscate your properties, your businesses, and throw you to prison because there's someone who likes your wealth. If you're an investor, I guarantee you, there are people inside the KGB who look at you like, "What? We want that." Okay, and the next thing you know, you are behind the bars, or if you're lucky, you're out of Russia. Ask Bill Browder. He'll tell you. Okay, so what happened to investments? Venture investments. Now I'm interested in venture investments. That kind of money that is investments that are used for high-tech startups, like companies on cutting edge of technology. Well, the annual volume of investments before the war in Russia was over $1 billion. Now, in the last year, the last 12 months, the investments into high-tech startups amounted to $78 million. 1 billion before, 78 million after. 1 billion. 1 billion is 15 times more than the investments now, Who in the right mind would invest in high-tech startups now? There's no such stupid people. It's not just the instability, it's volatility, it's political risks, it's insanity, really. And that, it's Russia is reaping what it started sowing 3.5 years ago. That's one of the results of the war. And actually, it's not going to get much worse because it's near zero. I mean, negative investments cannot happen. So that's pretty much we're getting done here. Done and done. Now, have you heard of shrinkflation? I'm sure you have. And in the Western countries, I'm not saying your life is great right now. Most of you are feeling shrinkflation. Right now, when you go to stores to buy food, you probably know what it is better than I do. In Russia, there's a new phenomenon. Skimpflation. Now, do you know what skimpflation is? Shrinkflation is when they take a product, for example, a bottle of milk that is 100, one liter, 1,000 milligrams. And they put less milk in it, say 10%, 900 milligrams. So, and the price stays the same. So the milk has just gone up in price by 10%, but you don't notice it because you pay the same price, only you get a little less milk. Now that's shrinkflation, pretty clear. Skimpflation is that when they take milk and they keep the same amount of volume, that same bottle, instead of just pure milk, they add some crap into milk, 10% of crap. Crap is cheap, and crap comes in different forms. Palm oil, I don't know, just anything, some chemicals, cheap stuff. So they dilute good product with something very cheap. Therefore, you get 10% cheaper product to make, and you sell it at the same price. So it's called skimpflation. Now in Russia, shrinkflation marries skimpflation into super weird duperflation, I'm telling you, it's odd. How do I know? Complaints. I start hearing complaints. I read all the news all the time from Russia, and here and there they start complaining. No, shrinkflation is old news. It started happening when I was still in Russia in 2022. Now, skimpflation, something that I'm just learning, and I'll keep my eyes open. Now, banking industry, very, very important. Why? Because remember I told you about all those defaults? They hit banks. And my today's live stream, on the thumbnail, it says numbers don't lie. And this is exactly what it is. Numbers don't lie. Now, very hard number, very clear, very black and white number. commercial banks, if we take consolidated profits of commercial banks for the month of August and compare them profits to the same profits to the same banks, the profits of the same banks to July, August to July, we will see that in August, the profits have declined by 50% just in 1 month. Huh? Now, in July, the profits amounted to 400 billion rubles. In August, they dropped to 200 billion rubles. The reason? Guess. Defaults. Yes, the defaults. They are coming like a tidal wave. I don't know. There is no running away from it. Now, what banks are doing right now, they're taking more of their profits and they're beefing up the reserves. The reserves is a part of capital, liquid capital in the bank. When someone defaults, bank takes money from the reserves and covers that default. So more and more of Russian banks' profits start using to cover the defaults. Now, banks use 33% more of the reserves than before because of the defaults. They're rising. I can feel tension is rising. The first bank already collapsed in Russia about 3 weeks ago, and it's huge. It was bank number 60 by the size of assets. And guess what? There's so little news of that. The only news I found was in 2 sources. The Central Bank of Russia, when it takes license away from a bank, when it forces bank to close doors, it must make a press release, and it did. And the second source was Business Consulting, and there was a little article saying, well, this bank closed down, number 60 in Russia. That's it. Magic. As if it never happened. They don't want to agitate people. They don't want to scare, because that is a very sensitive issue. When people are scared, they run to banks to take their money out. It's called the bank run. And the Russian state doesn't like that. It doesn't like to give money out of the banks that easily. But I feel there's something up in the air. I have this gut feeling. Mark my word down. No. Now to non-ferrous metals industry, aluminum. And I have a personal story here. I worked with a large aluminum company in Russia. Largest and one of world's largest aluminum makers. Rusal, Российский алюминий, or Русский алюминий, it's the first time in history of this company recorded a net loss of 87 million rubles. Company's consolidated debt is 7.5 billion rubles. Its revenue in the last 12 months declined by 15%. How does that smell like? Net loss of such amount, and revenues are down, and huge debt. That smells like bankruptcy. When I returned to Russia from the United States, I landed a job as an executive then it was a fairly small construction company. We built power plants, and, that was before we started power plants. We were building substations, high voltage substations, and HV lines. And this is where we started. And one of my first project really was we were invited to submit a bid to build 2 substations, 220 HV and high voltage substation, and a rectifying substation for the construction of a new aluminum plant. The plant was called SAS-2. Sayanogorsk aluminum plant, number 2, because they already had a plant. Now, the business was growing, Russian economy was growing like crazy. That's 2004. And they invited a Canadian company called Hatch Engineering. Some of you might have heard of it, to manage the construction of SAS-2, Sayanogorsk Aluminum Plant 2. And our two lots, our two facilities, they were not that big. They were like $40 million compared to huge, like multi-billion-dollar construction of the aluminum plant, right? So they were small parts, but they still, Hatch managed everything. And we won the bid. I prepared the bid. It was my first contract in the company. I was like, wow, I came from a small village in Maine, and I just in a few months, I was dealing this freaking huge project. I was very excited about that. So anyway, I'm telling you this story because I knew Rusal back then. The money was abundant. The company was swimming in money. They didn't know what to do with money. They paid Hatch $40 million for 2 years of working in Moscow, managing the product. They built EPCM, engineering, procurement, management, construction management. So the Hatch was in charge of M. It was managing the construction. So they didn't have general contractor for the entire plant. They just had companies like ours coming in and building parts. So we built 2 substations. Oh boy, you should have seen Rusal back then. They were literally swimming in money. There was so much money. And now, I don't know how it's possible for one of the world's largest aluminum producers to record loss. Well, I tell you, I know how. Okay, it's because no one buys Russian aluminum anymore. Russia is isolated. Putin is responsible. Putin has done that. Putin is to blame. Anyway, Rusal, goodbye. Smells like bankruptcy. Most likely, they're not going to go under. They're a very strategical part of Russian economy because that's the biggest aluminum producer. They're going to be bailed out by the state somehow, but they're going to be hanging on the edge there, And definitely not Rusal that I knew. The next news is, despite being pressured by the Russian state, followed by the secret police KGB, and demonetized by Google, I am still here. That's the news. Shaken, but not broken. I will go on. You have my promise. Thank you very much for your precious time, for your support, for prayers and love. Thank you for the coffees you buy me at buymeacoffee.com, for PayPal, for Patreon. The financial support is never required, but, much needed these days and extremely appreciated. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. So, I told you, I promised you I'd tell you positive news, okay? Because there's got to be something positive in Russia, right? In Russian economy. Of course, there's one industry that is doing fantastic, and it continues doing well from week to week to week. It just grows more and more. And that is that the funeral industry. They have so many more customers on the way these days. Now, the third part of the report, enough with microeconomics. The third part is macroeconomics. Macroeconomic indicators, the general health of Russian economy. And I'll try to be very brief here. I'm going to tell you of 2 things. First is inflation. Inflation has jumped from minus 1.4% previous week to 5.25%. That's a huge jump. One of the biggest jumps ever recorded. Why? Well, the seasonal deflation is over. You see, Russia depends a lot on fruits and vegetables that are grown and harvested in July and August and first part of September. It's called the harvest season. And the harvest season produces so much agricultural products, they flood the market and they drive the prices down. It's called seasonal, seasonal fruits and vegetables. Then they're cheaper than in other times of the year. So that influences inflation. And it drives inflation down in July and August. Well, guess what? Numbers don't lie. Come September, inflation goes back up. And this year is absolutely same. And this week increase is very big. From minus 0.4, that's actually deflation for a couple of weeks. Russia had deflation because of the seasonality. So it goes up to 5.25, which is insane. Galloping. By the end of the year, we will count real life inflation. It will be galloping. The state already releases the numbers that is around 12.5%. That's not true. That's cooked. Okay, the real inflation is going to be in 20 or 30 or 40%. Not 20, 30 or 40 or perhaps 50%. Anyway, the inflation is back. And the second key economic indicator I'd like to speak is economic growth. Now, GDP was planned to increase by 3.5% last year and in the spring, as late as in the spring. You see, every year, Russian Ministry of Finance and Russian Ministry of Economic Development, that is Ministry of Nothing, by the way, the Ministry of Finance, they do something. They're in charge of the budget, of money transfers, and so forth. The Ministry of Economic Development is just a name. Okay, but they come up with some plans, forecasts, prognoses, and so forth. So the plan for 2025 was the growth 3.5%. The latest they said it was May. Now they downgraded the prognosis in October to 1%, from 3.5 to 1%. Now, don't tell me that those people who are in charge of this forecasting, planning really, not forecasting, planning, don't tell me that they make such huge mistakes. You can make a mistake, this number can deviate by just a little tiny bit, a fraction, 3.4, 3.3% or whatever, but not by, 2 quarters. Over 2 quarters. 2/3, over 2/3. It's incredible. From 3.5 to 1%. Those people who plan the growth of Russian economy, they're inadequate, uneducated. They need to be fired and prosecuted. Now, for the next year, at this point, they plan the growth, more modest growth, but still growth of 1.3%. Now, and this is something big hitting Russian economy, and that is the budget deficit. I made an entire live stream explaining the budget deficit yesterday, but I'd like to simplify it to you. Now, they usually sugarcoat things and inflate the numbers to make them look good, just like they did in 2025. They said, well, things are going to be great, 3.5%, and we'll be happy, we'll be rich, all of us. You Russian folks, don't worry. You'll be eating red caviar by, pounds. Comes the end of 2025. Now, comes the end of 2025, and they say, well, you know what? Things didn't work out. It's 1%, which is not much at all, right? Now, for the next year, they're saying next year is going to be 1.3%. You know what it means? That number is very much sugar-coated. It's inflated to make it look good because Russia has entered the recession right now. They're not giving us official numbers, but Russia is in the recession, technical recession. And the number will not be 1.3% of GDP economic growth. It is going to be minus 1, 2, 3%, whatever. It's going to be bad. And I named today's live stream something big just happened with Russian economy. Things have gotten so bad that they released the budget for the next year. And they tried to sugarcoat it so much, but they couldn't. It's terrible. And it is right now, it is looking absolutely terrible. The deficit, the economic growth, the spendings. But we know that comes next year, whatever bogus numbers they're giving us now, they're going to downgrade them. That is their historic action. They have definitely done it since the start of the war. We know that the economy is in such a bad shape that even sugar-coated, even inflated to make it look pleasant for everyone and look optimistic, they can't do much. It's looking terrible. So the real situation is much, much worse. And they're not hiding it anymore. They have started preparing Russian people for huge economic hardship. The federal ministers come out and say for Russian people to get ready. And of course, there's a reason for that. The enemies around us, around Russians, the enemies, they want to strip Russia of its sovereignty. They're driving the prices down. They're not buying anything from Russia. It's them. Not our fault, Putin says. Not our fault, the government says. Well, you must stick with us. You must be strong. You must be resilient because we are in a time of war with the entire world. Thank you so very much for watching today's weekly review. I really would appreciate if you hit the like button right now. It would help this message to be spread and seen by more people. Thank you very much for coming. Carthago delenda est.